The-O was an absolute unit, built by Thomas Scirocco himself to serve as his own personal unit, and I think it's safe to say that he spared absolutely no effort or money to make it the best machine he possibly could. And let's start by looking at one of its most striking elements, the armor. At first glance, it looks extremely bulky, and in a way, it is. The armor is very thick and can take a lot of punishment. But at the same time, the O was still a very fast and agile machine. Such was simply the genius of Scirocco as a mobile suit designer. Its backpack provided more thrust than contemporary mobile armors, and it had 50 verniers spread across its body, which were then all fueled by extra propellant tanks that were also spread across the body, which then definitely contributed to its chonky appearance. But it had one more trick up its sleeve to increase its performance even further: the biosensor. This was a special type of new type control system that increased the powers of a new type and allowed them to directly interface with their mobile suit, allowing them more precise control over its movements. This system was fine-tuned specifically for Scirocco, and it's even said that he didn't wear a normal suit into combat so that he could get the maximum effect out of this system. However, despite being called a biosensor, this was a different system from the biosensor that was installed in the Zeta Gundam. The one installed in the Zeta was made by Anaheim, whereas the one in the O was built by Scirocco himself. They do the same thing, but their development and how they achieved this performance was completely separate. And what also helped with the O's surprising performance was the design of the legs. Because they were designed specifically for space combat, they were less designed as walking legs and more as movable armored thrusters. As a result, the manual of the Master Grade even speculates that even though they could be used for walking, they would most likely be used as some glorified landing gear. In terms of weapons then, it was surprisingly simple. In each side skirt, it held 2 beam swords, which were called swords because the blade was curved, and it had a massive beam rifle with an output of 2.6 megawatts. This rifle was highly accurate, extremely reliable, and its powerful shots could be rapidly fired. The only downside was that this rifle was custom made by Scirocco and didn't adhere to the standards of any other mobile suits, meaning that they couldn't use this weapon. And to power it, it used a proprietary E-cap on the bottom of the handle, so it's definitely a good thing that it was a very reliable weapon. Or, if we go with the Gundam Combat card game, it also had a customized railgun in its arsenal. And again, the O had a trick up its sleeve. Hidden inside of its giant front skirts were 2 sub-arms that could act as any other regular arm, including supplying energy to beam weapons, like the beam swords. This allowed the use of 4 weapons at once, and thanks to a combination of Scirocco's piloting skills and the biosensor, this made the O extremely lethal in close combat. What probably comes as a surprise then is that this massive mobile suit with a lot of thrusters and powerful weapons had a generator output of only 1,840 kilowatts. Sure, this was nothing to sneeze at, but this doesn't really track with the fact that the upper body supposedly housed a battleship-class thermonuclear reactor with an output that far exceeded that of most mobile suits, so something isn't adding up here. And we get a very sensible explanation for this from the Project File Zeta Gundam book. It's very possible that Scirocco didn't want the rest of the Titans knowing about how powerful his mobile suit really was. Like, he was planning to take over the Titans, so a portion of them would inevitably become his enemies. As a result, the 1,840 kilowatts was simply something written down on a datasheet that he had to submit to the higher-ups. And there's a good chance that those hidden sub-arms also weren't on that datasheet. And also according to the book, the fin on the back was meant for cooling down the reactor. again insinuating that this thing had a reactor that was far more powerful than just 1,840 kilowatts. But so, in the eyes of Scirocco, this was pretty much the perfect machine. Something that he also put in the name. Like, I always thought that it had a bit of a funny, nonsensical name, but there is actually a reason to the madness. According to Japanese Wikipedia, the real-life mech designer, Kobayashi Makoto, stated in an interview that the name is meant to, represent God. The means that it's unique, as in The-O, and O is meant as a perfect circle. So, The-O is the one unique perfect thing known as God. Now, unfortunately, no source is given for this claim, so do take it with a grain of salt, but I can totally see someone as humble as Scirocco naming his mobile suit The-O for just that reason. In combat then, it was meant to operate alongside two of Scirocco's other handmade machines, the Balinoak Saman, which has a high-performance sensor installed in its forehead, and the Pallas Athena, a machine with heavy firepower at the cost of lower close-range performance. The-O then would take on the role of the close combat specialist and commander unit, with the tip of its head being able to function as some kind of beacon or rallying point. But in this formation, there was room for one more machine. While Scirocco was building the O on board of the Jupitris, he also began work on a companion mobile suit called the Titania. And in this case, you can take that companion quite literally. As I'm sure you're all aware, Scirocco was looking for a woman to rule over the Earth sphere and to bring it into a new era, and the Titania was meant to be the mobile suit for said chosen woman. As a result, despite being a development from the O, it's a much more streamlined and refined machine, taking some design clues from the Pallas Athena. But when we then get to the weapons, we can definitely see some things from the O returning, like the beam rifle, which is the exact same custom beam rifle that the O was using, or the beam swords, which follow a similar concept as the ones from the O. The Titania had 6 of them, and each shoulder had 2 hidden sub-arms that could use those beam swords, making this machine extremely deadly in close combat as well. But then the one thing that set it apart from the O was that it was outfitted with a Psychoma system capable of using funnels, something that the O's biosensor couldn't. These funnels were stored on the shoulder armor, and it's believed that Scirocco received this funnel technology during his short-lived alliance with Axis. For defensive capabilities then, it is sometimes seen with an I-field generator, although in more recent sources, it usually isn't listed as having one. But unfortunately for Scirocco, this machine was never meant to be. Him and the O were defeated in the final battle of the Grips War, leaving the Titania as nothing more than a blueprint, and the O as nothing more than a wreck, which was recovered by the AUG after the battle. And while this was the end for those machines, it wouldn't be the end of their legacy, which we'll get into after a quick word from today's sponsor, NordVPN, the premier VPN service that not just helps you dodge all of those pesky region locks and age verification thingies, but also gives you extra protection while browsing online. And if you don't have Nord yet, by using the code kkrt or the link down below, you'll not just get a sweet discount, but you'll also be supporting the channel. Back to the legacy of the O and the Titania we go then, starting with the Titania, a machine that would be built by an organization calling themselves the Clan. These were Jupiter's remnants under the leadership of Hyphon, who continued believing in Scirocco's ideals, and therefore wanted to continue fighting for them. But they wouldn't just build the Titania as is, they also upgraded it with the latest tech available, which is then why they added a 2 to both its model number and its name. And even by just looking at it, you could tell that the Titania II was a very different machine from the regular Titania, starting with its weapons. For ranged combat, it had 2 powerful beam cannons on the back, 8 funnels, and a brand new long beam rifle. Visually, it looks like a descendant of the Fedayeen rifle, but rather than forming a single blade out of the butt of the rifle, it could form 3 blades out of the muzzle. But while those were all of its listed weapons, I think that it might have a few more tricks up its sleeve. On its head, it seems to have a pair of Vulcan guns, and on its shield, there is what looks like a 3-barreled launcher of some kind. What we do know about the shield is that it has an I-field generator and that it stores 6 beam sabers, 2 for the regular arms and 4 for the sub-arms located on the shoulders. Another big change then was that the mobile suit could now transform into a highly maneuverable mobile armor mode, which was also one of the reasons why the Titania II looked so different from the original Titania. The most ominous change though was definitely done to the cockpit. Installed inside of it were several rod-like manipulators that could be used to entangle the pilot, forcing them into the cockpit. Plus, these manipulators could open up, revealing a needle that could be used to drug the pilot, after which they could then be manipulated by the clan into doing whatever the hell they wanted. The meaning for this system seems to be quite clear. While Scirocco had intended the Titania as being the mobile suit for his queen, the Titania II was a mobile suit intended to serve the interests of the clan, and by extension, the leader of the clan. And the Titania II wasn't the only mobile suit that the clan was working on. Together with the original Titania, Scirocco also made blueprints for the Over.on, a next-generation mobile suit that could be described as a Gundam version of the O. But unlike the Titania II, it wouldn't be the clan who finished the Over.on. Due to ideological differences, Dr. Tonio Mannheim defected from the clan and took the incomplete Over.on with him to Anaheim. And let's say that Anaheim was very happy to lend him a hand completing this state-of-the-art mobile suit. Officially, this was done out of pure engineering curiosity, but off the record, they were very interested in one particular piece of technology that it possessed, another version of the biosensor developed by Scirocco. Rather than one solid machine, this biosensor was made up of a large amount of microprocessors that could then be put wherever there was room on the mobile suit. And these microprocessors were so small that they could even be implanted into humans, making them more compatible with mobile suits. These little chips were compared to letters that would then work together to create a book. Hence the nickname of this biosensor was the Grimoire, and it definitely feels like a precursor to the Psycho Frame. It even has a little transformation when it activates. The plates on the face open up and the V-fin becomes a bit more elaborate. And this new biosensor also came with another very interesting feature. In the original Zeta Gundam anime, the O was defeated in a very strange way. Despite being an extremely mobile suit, the Zeta Gundam was able to take it down with a very simple kamikaze attack. The Walpurgis Eve manga then explained that this happened due to clashing psycho waves. When the Zeta Gundam and the O fought each other, their respective biosensors were having their own battle. The Zeta Gundam's biosensor won, and this then caused the joints of the O to malfunction, causing the so-called grips down effect, also known as the Curse of Grips. Dr. Mannheim witnessed this event and decided to weaponize it as the Eldritch system. When used, enemy mobile suits have their joints locked up, just as what happened with the O, but their thrusters would still be functional, still giving them some means of escape. Also, when used against another Grimoire-equipped machine, only the unit with the weakest new type pilot would be affected. Plus, this Eldritch system was also the key to the ultimate weapon that the clan was developing, which was then also the reason why Dr. Mannheim escaped with the unfinished Over.on. But so, back to the mobile suit itself. Even without all of the Saikomu hocus pocus, the design made by Scirocco was so advanced that despite being designed in UC 0087, it was still considered cutting edge when it was finally completed in UC 0089, and that is with mobile suit technology progressing extremely quickly due to the Grips War and the subsequent First Neo-Zeon War. Shirako wanted it to be a next-generation mobile suit, and he totally succeeded with this. The Over.on is a high-performance close combat mobile suit with characteristics that the manga describes as being similar to future 4th generation mobile suits. So, effectively, Shirako managed to predict how this future generation of mobile suits would operate. As for the weapons then, it had standard weapons like a pair of head-mounted 60mm Vulcan guns, 2 beam sabers, and a beam shot rifle, but it also had some more unique weapons, like the multi-layer shield. At first glance, it looks like the shield used by the GPO-2, but this was just the first layer. Underneath all of that armor was the actual shield. A shield that had some pretty great offensive capabilities. It had a pair of heat scissors that could also generate a beam, and it had a mega particle cannon. And as finishing touch, the Over.on also had a sub-arm hidden in each knee. But these were only usable when it was resonating with the wreckage of the O. Also, when these were deployed, the Over.on suddenly got some extra beam sabers. It's not shown exactly where they came from, but they're the same type of beam saber used by the Nemo Rhymes, and there just happened to be a wrecked one within reaching distance of the sub-arm, so more likely than not, that's where they came from. Plus, for sentimental reasons, Dr. Mannheim also made a set of optional armor for the Over.on that visually resembled the O. But unlike the older Chobham armor, this new armor provided extra protection and more fuel tanks while also maintaining mobility. And on top of that, the fuel tanks could also be filled with a liquefied version of the Grimoire. In short, this was to decrease its sensitivity and therefore to prevent the unit from going out of control. The reason this armor was first equipped though was for a completely different reason. The Federation was about to conduct an inspection of the facility, and Anaheim didn't want the Federation finding out about their little Gundam experiment. Which then leads us to another problem with the Over.on. No matter how powerful it was still a mobile suit designed by Shirako, a man who was the final figurehead of the Titans. So if the Federation caught wind of this machine, it might interfere with Anaheim's plans to have Anaheim produce the Federation's next generation mass production mobile suit, the Jaguar. The Over.on had to go, which is then what led to the events of the first Valpurgis manga. While it was meant to be destroyed, it would instead be caught in the middle of a new three-way struggle, featuring the Clan, Neo-Zeon, and the AUG. Basically the Grips War version 2.0, but on a more local scale. And throughout this conflict, the Over.on would get a few power-ups, with the first one coming in the form of the Messala Glashtin, a support mobile armor that was designed by Shirako at the same time as the Over.on. But just as with the Over.on, it wouldn't actually be built until much later. On the outside, it looks very similar to the Messala in mobile armor mode, and even its model number is similar, but it's actually a completely different machine whose main goal is to work together with the Over.on, and it could do so in 4 different forms. The first form was the base form of the Glashtin, and allowed it to independently function as a heavy fighter. The second form was visually similar to the first form, but its function was completely different. The barrel cowl of the main megaparticle cannon was ditched, and a few of the central armor parts were also purged to make room for the Over.on. Rather than functioning as its own machine, the Glashtin became a Mega Rider for the Over.on. And on top of that, because the Over.on's reactor became linked with the Glashtin's reactor, the Glashtin's Hyper Mega Launcher could now fire more powerful beams in rapid succession. Although even with the Over.on's reactor, they weren't quite as powerful as the beams fired by the original Mega Rider. But it did make up for this with improved accuracy. The third form then involved the boost pods of the Glashtin combining with the backpack of the Over.on. Not only did this give the unit an incredible speed boost, but it also unlocked the hidden claw arms inside of the pods. The one downside though is that this seemingly left the rest of the Glashtin stranded in space, because those booster pods weren't just the main propulsion, they were its only propulsion. So finally we have the fourth form, which is really just a minor variant of the third form. The claw arms are tucked away, and the body of the Glashtin now becomes a handheld weapon, which makes this one of the few handheld weapons that has a pilot inside of it. Also, as a side note, everywhere I looked says that this fourth form stores the claws away, as you can also see in the official artwork. But in the manga, you can actually see the Over.on using both the claw arms from the third form and the Hyper Mega Launcher from the fourth form together, so it's not like the pilot had to choose one or the other. Unfortunately for the Over.on then, this Gundam version of the O would meet a fate that was almost identical to that of the regular O. The big difference being that the core pod did make it out alive, and this thing served as both the main cockpit and the backpack of the Over.on, and it also carried the oh-so-important Grimoire system. And then in this case, it also became a very convenient escape craft as well, with a pair of small caliber beam guns installed for extra survivability. And even with the original Over.on destroyed, this thing was still in the fight. Anticipating that things could go wrong, Dr. Mannheim didn't just make one Over.on, he made 3. The second one was a spare unit that just had a different color scheme, but didn't end up being used, and the third unit was a full armor variant, sometimes called the Full Armor Over.on, sometimes called the Full Armor Ampersand Gundam. This unit combined the Over.on with technology taken from the Full Armor Hyakushiki Kai. Thanks to the extra armor, it was much more durable, and it also had a lot of extra weapons. It came packing with 4 twin-tube missile pods, 2 beam cannons on the backpack, a high mega cannon on the chest, 2 head-mounted Vulcan guns, 2 beam sabers, a long mega buster, and 2 hidden sub-arms in the legs, which apparently no longer needed to resonate with the O to be activated, so I guess resonating once unlocks these sub-arms forever. And remember, while the mobile suit is different, the full armor Over.on has the same cockpit as the first Over.on that did resonate with the O. And to complete its arsenal, it also came with 2 reflector panels capable of generating an eye field. But despite all of this added bulk, the full armor would prove to be an extremely agile and extremely deadly mobile suit. Or if the situation called for it, all of those full armor parts could also be instantly ditched, turning it back into the standard Over.on. Ironically enough then, even though the original Over.on was designed to operate alongside the original Titania, the Over.on full armor would show off against the Titania II. And with that, we leave the traditional Universal Century as we head over to the Kazuhisa Kondo version of the Universal Century. Here, the development of the O would go very different. Rather than getting a streamlined Gundam made by remnants of the Titans, we would get a bulky behemoth made for Neo Zeon by Zeon engineers who were involved with the development of the O. And this new machine was called the O2, and sometimes also known as the Hauer. It was a land-based bunker buster that came with both heavy armor and heavy weaponry, specifically designed for taking out bases. It had surface-to-air missiles on its back, 2 beam cannons on its chest, 2 machine cannons on the clavicles, 2 hidden arms on those massive front skirts, beam sabers for those hidden arms, and a 120mm machine gun that was as long as a standard mobile suit was tall. And to move around, it relied on a whopping 12 hovering units in the legs. So yeah, it shouldn't come as a surprise that this was an extremely costly mobile suit to produce. And yet, a handful of these things were made and even saw combat on the front lines. Combat data, however, would reveal one big weakness of the O2. It was a massive machine, making it a very easy target. So Neo-Zeon engineers began working on their next project, the Breda, or Breda, which was a miniaturized version of the O2, although miniaturized here is very relative. These were still big mobile suits with a head height of 22.3 meters. As for the weapons, it had two 50mm Vulcan guns, two beam rifles, and a Vulcan shot machine gun. But while these machines were powerful, mass production would not happen. Only around 10 of them were ever produced, and it sounds like even less saw any actual combat, with the Federation only having one recorded encounter with them. Still, it would be upgraded into the Jaguar I. The armor got a complete overhaul, making its The-O roots less obvious, it got better thrusters, and it also got better weapons. It got a Vulcan shot rifle, two beam sabers, and four 30mm Vulcan guns. Overall, it was considered to be slightly better than the Sazabi heavy equipment ground type. But again, it wouldn't see mass production. Only 7 units were ever produced due to the costly and time-consuming construction of this thing. It did kinda get a variant though, but this machine only appeared in a story that was called Another War in UC-0044. It's a hybrid photo novel and manga, which, as the title indicates, takes place in Universal Century 0044. And instead of mobile suits, the mechs are called Panzerwaffen. So yeah, it's pretty clear that this is a totally non-canonical story that combines elements from World War II and the Universal Century. And in this story, the Jaguar II is described as an upgraded version of the Jaguar with stronger armor and better ground performance. The head sensors were also completely reworked and were now 3 times as powerful. And these upgraded machines would face off against an alternate version of the G Commander. The mainline version has the model number RX92 LAS, whereas this alternate version has the model number MF92S and also has one more trick up its sleeve. Stored inside of its thrusters are 2 Panzerwaffen called Bodyguard Radiobeams. These were small remote-controlled units with only a single Vulcan gun rifle as a weapon, but they were not to be underestimated. Because they were remote-controlled by the onboard computer of the G Commander, their response speed was much faster than that of a normal human. And they were incredibly agile on top of that. Also, their main goal wasn't individual combat anyways. They were more escort units designed to cover for the G Commander's one weakness, close combat. While I was editing the video then, I did stumble upon one more appearance of the Jaguar II, and this time it is from the mainline Universal Century. In UC-0092, Neo-Zeon forces set out to attack the Aramida base near Berlin, and at least one Jaguar II was part of this operation. And this wasn't the only development from The-O that appeared in an alternate version of the Universal Century. There's also UC Engage crossover. What if, during the events from Char's counterattack, Armor was joined by Camille and Judo, and what if Char was joined by Haman and Scirocco? Don't ask too many questions, this is a weird crossover story, so just roll with it. And well, for the most part, the story plays out the same. Char still attacks the Federation, but he now seems very friendly with Haman, and he still ends up trying to drop Axis on the planet, which is then stopped by Amuro and friends. But things don't end here. Even though Char's plan was, again, a total failure, Scirocco wasn't about to give up, and suddenly, from one scene to the next, the O is transformed into the O-Cross, a massive mobile armor that looks like it uses the body of the O as a base. Unfortunately, the only other things that we know about this unit for the time being is its weaponry. It has 2 giant missile pods on the shoulders and 4 shields on its skirt armor with 10 megaparticle cannons each. These can be shot individually in all directions, or they can be combined into one powerful burst. And these shields might have also inspired the shield that was used by the O from Thunderbolt. But this is where the development history of the O ends. At least in Gundam, because Makoto Kobayashi liked his design so much that he would feature variants of it in his other works, like for example the Neo Geo in Dragon's Heaven. So yeah, let me know down below what your favorite version of the O is. Do you go for the OG, the Gundam version from Valpurgis, the chonkers from Kondo, or something completely different like the Titania? As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.